All right, welcome everyone in. Today we're going to be talking about Crick, son of Yawgmouth. We're going to be doing a bit of a deck breakdown. Obviously, we just need to start with the commander first and foremost. So Crick, son of Yawgmouth, is a legendary creature horror minion for 4 Phyrexian black, Phyrexian black, Phyrexian black. It has lifelink. Most important part about Crick is whenever you cast a black spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on her, but for each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay the mana. Why would you play something like Crick? Obviously, the main point of this deck is to cheat on its mana cost. You want to go very fast. It is still one of the fastest decks in the format, regardless of the bans that happened. Did it slow it down a little bit? Yes. But then again, so did everybody. We're just going to start going over some of the lines in Crick, some of the easier ones, some of the more complex ones. And I guess the best way to describe Crick is a turbo creature-based deck for the most part, but it can also manually storm and has some other weird combos that we'll go into that don't come up all that often, but will come up every now and again. So let's just get started. First up on the chopping block, we're going to go over the Hoarding Broodlord line. Very simple line, very easy to understand, very straightforward, and for the most part, it takes like 2 cards to set up. Once you have Crick on board with any certain amount of mana, you could do something as simple as an Entomb and a Reanimate, and bring the Hoarding Broodlord onto the battlefield. What happens once you get Hoarding Broodlord onto the battlefield after you've cast Crick, you're going to tutor up your Saw in Half. Now, in a lot of lines, Saw in Half, you need the other excess mana in order to cast it. Just the Hoarding Broodlord alone can't help you convoke it, but because you have Keurig, you can actually convoke with the Hoarding Broodlord, convoke with Keurig, and then pay 2 life to Saw in Half your Hoarding Broodlord. After you've accomplished that, you'll get a copy of your Hoarding Broodlord, and, well, 2 copies of your Hoarding Broodlord because of Saw in Half. And then you will tutor up your Sacrifice as one of your first combos, and Peer into the Abyss as the other part. Another part that is really great about Keurig specifically is not only can you then use the copies of Hoarding Broodlord to convoke these spells, but you can also use life in order to make sure that you still have mana in your mana pool. So, for instance, we can convoke this Hoarding Broodlord to sacrifice this Hoarding Broodlord, making 8 black mana. And then once we've done that, we will convoke the Hoarding Broodlord and say we want to just hold on to at least 3 black mana for sure, right? So we have 8 in our mana pool currently. So we say, okay, we'll use 4 of the black, and then we will just pay 6 life for the other half of Peer into the Abyss, and we'll cast Peer into the Abyss. From there, draw half your library, and if you can't piece something together after that, it's going to be a little bit rough for you, but obviously we'll talk about more of the lines that actually get you to the point where you're winning the game. Next up on the docket, we're going to talk about the Ooze Modius engine. All Crick pilots know what the Ooze Modius engine is, but we're going to talk about it today. Essentially what this line is you are going to have a Necrotic Ooze on the battlefield. So Necrotic Ooze reads, as long as Necrotic Ooze is on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all creatures in all graveyards, not just your own. So if you happen to be up against another Keurig, or you somehow steal their Necrotic Ooze, you can actually go for this line if you have the mana available and you are able to have the other parts. But we'll see how that goes. So setting up this combo is actually pretty simple for the most part. Buried Alive is probably one of the biggest MVPs in the deck because not only does it set up an Ooze Modius engine, but it also sets up some other lines that we can talk about and go through here in a little bit. But I just wanted to shout out Buried Alive as being a fantastic card in this piece. And you can simply reanimate the Necrotic Ooze after you've buried it alive, or if you happen to have it in hand, you simply entomb Asmodeus. So I will read Asmodeus. So Asmodeus has a binding contract clause that says if you would draw a card, exile the top card of your library face down instead. But the important part is it has black, 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 draw 7 cards. And then the second ability is black, return all cards exiled with Asmodeus, the Archfiend, to their owner's hands, and you lose that much life. Now, however, because Asmodeus is not going to be on the field, the binding contract does not take effect. So all we care about is the black, 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 draw 7 cards, so that will be in your graveyard. So the second part is going to be Scourge Familiar. Very, very simple card. Flying, discard a card, and add a black mana. How does this work? Once these 2 cards are in your graveyard, and say you have a hand of just 2 cards, right? We'll just say it's these. Obviously, you could go for something with these 2 cards, but let's just say you have these 2 cards in hand. Instead, you are going to discard a card to the Necrotic Ooze through Scourge Familiar's ability. So you're going to add a black. Then you're going to go ahead and just discard this other card in your hand, add another black. Then you simply pay 2 life for the other black mana in the mana pool. So you pay 2 life for the other for the other black that you need to activate Asmodeus to draw 7 cards through Necrotic Ooze. You draw 7 cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there you go. It's as simple as that. Now you look through your hand and you go, okay, I've got this Mox Amber. I don't need that. Pitch that for a black through that effect of the Scourge Familiar. I don't need this Takenuma. Discard that for a black. And you know what? I don't really need this Fel to Profane. I don't need to kill something right now. I'll discard that for a black. Cool. Activate Asmodeus again, draw 7 cards, repeat the loop, and you've now been able to draw your entire deck, and you go for a win. Next up on the list is one that's not really talked about too much. It's not the strongest combo in the deck, but the reason that I do like it is very hard to interact with because it is all activated abilities. Right now, we are going to talk about the Fleshwrither line. Fleshwrither has the ability to transfigure for 1 black. You sacrifice this creature, you search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost as this creature, you put it into play, you shuffle. Okay, so you can only play this as a sorcery, which is why it's not the best in the world. But again, all activated abilities, so that's what makes it nice. Okay, so here's what we're going to do in setting up the Fleshwrither line, and it all starts simply from Keurig and Fleshwrither alone. Have Keurig, have Fleshwrither on the field. You're going to tap a mana somewhere to have the first generic mana of Fleshwrither, and you're going to pay 4 life. You're going to sacrifice the Fleshwrither, and the Fleshwrither is going to tutor up a Necrotic Ooze. So Fleshwrither will be in your yard. So from there, Necrotic Ooze now has Fleshwrither's ability. You're going to tap for another generic mana, so we're at 2 generic mana, and we're going to pay 8 life at this point. We're going to sacrifice the Necrotic Ooze and do the exact same thing. We are going to tutor up another card, Balthor the Defiled. Balthor is an interesting card. So Balthor says that all minions get +1/+1, which is interesting because it actually does pump our commander. But the important part is it has black, remove Balthor the Defiled from the game, and each player returns all black and all red creature cards from their graveyard to play. So this is another reason why this line can be a little tricky. You can accidentally bring someone's Dothy Voidwalker back, or some other opposition agent, maybe if they had one earlier in the game. But typically you're trying to go fast, and typically these things won't be down at the time that you go for this. Then you're going to pay 6 life into Balthor's ability because you do not need to pay for any of it because it's all activated through Crick. So at this point, we are now at 14 life. We are going to exile Balthor. We are going to turn the Necrotic Ooze and the Fleshwrither to play. So then we're going to use another generic. So we're at 3 generic, another 4 life. So I believe we're at 18, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to sacrifice the Fleshwrither, and we're going to tutor up a card into the battlefield. And that card is going to be Vile Entomber. So essentially, Vile Entomber is a creature that entombs a card for us. That's all it does. And the card that is going to entomb is Asmodeus the Archfiend. Now, obviously, we do not have the Scourge Familiar as part of our earlier line, but the hope here is that activating the Asmodeus at least twice, because you're going to be paying 6 life for 14 cards, that in the top 14 cards, you can either A, find an entomb, some kind of discard outlet, a way to kill the Vile Entomber and reanimate it back so that you can put the Scourge Familiar onto your yard, and then start the line, draw your whole deck, and then we'll go into the actual win lines, the way that we actually win the game right now. How do we actually win the game? I know that you're asking it. Don't worry. I'm here for you. So obviously we'll talk about how we get through some of these lines, and I'll show some examples of that. But typically, at least for me, my main win con is going to be using Chainer Dementia Master, Dimir Houseguard, and Grey Merchant of Asphodel. I will go through these one by one, and I will explain what they do. Chainer Dementia Master. All nightmares get +1/+1. Not really relevant. Pay black, and 3 life, and you put a target creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That creature is black and is a nightmare in addition to its other types. When Chainer Dementia Master leaves the battlefield, you exile all nightmares you control. Dimir Houseguard, not a big thing in the world. It has fear. you sacrifice a creature to regenerate it. The only part that we care about is the fact that it says sacrifice on it. Simple enough. And then Powerhouse Grey Merchant of Asphodel. When Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the amount of life lost this way. So Grey Merchant gets through protection, in case you're curious about that. It's also all creature-based loops. Again, very hard to interact with. What do we typically want to do here? Say, for instance, we just cast a Buried Alive, and we put all 3 of these directly into the yard. Okay. Then we'll pay 2 life through Keurig, and we will reanimate the Chainer Dimension Master back onto the battlefield. Then we can go through it a couple ways. If you are incredibly low on life, and maybe you're like, cool, I maybe have 1, max 2 activations here, you can activate Chainer Dimension Master for 9 life, 6 for the black, 3 for the life as part of the cost, and return the Grey Merchant to the battlefield. At this point, each opponent will lose 7 life, and you will gain 21. From there, you pay 9 life into his ability again. You return the Dimir Houseguard to the battlefield. You simply sack the Grey Merchant of Asphodel to the Dimir Houseguard to make sure it gets regenerated. Again, not relevant. And then you simply pay 9 life, reanimate the Grey Merchant through Chainer again, sacrifice it to Dimir Houseguard again, and repeat this loop until your opponents are dead. Like I said, this does get through protection. And the other thing to understand about this line specifically is, say you were able to gain some life somewhere, right? Maybe you put out Grey Merchant earlier in the game, you sacrificed it to a Calling the Weak or something, okay? And say you have 20-something life. If you pay 9 life into Chainer, and you target the Grey Merchant at the beginning of this line, and someone attempts to kill the Chainer in response, you can then pay 9 life and target Grey Merchant again over the top of that. Say another person goes for it. If you have, again, another 9 life, you can pay that 9 life again to retarget the Grey Merchant and go over the top of people's interaction to drain the table. Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's the same win line, but I'm showing people from the Asmodeus solution. Just another quick example here. We're going to talk about the Asmodeus engine one more time, but we're going to show how that translates into actually winning the game. Like I said, let's say we have a couple cards in hand. As you can see by the graveyard, we have a Buried Alive, which Buried Alive our combo, and we reanimated the Necrotic Ooze onto the battlefield. So now we have the Asmodeus engine. So essentially what we can do now is discard 3 to draw 7, right? So we repeat this loop over and over and over again. Now, here's the fun part about this loop and why this is one of the main loops that we go for, okay? So once you've drawn through most of your deck and you find our 3 main win the game pieces from earlier, which is Chainer, Grey Merchant, and Dimir Houseguard, you actually can simply discard them to the Scourge Familiar's effect, put them into the graveyard. Necrotic Ooze now has the ability of all of these creatures. So you simply pay 9 life through Necrotic Ooze to bring out the Grey Merchant of Asphodel. You then sacrifice the Grey Merchant of Asphodel to Necrotic Ooze through Dimir Houseguard's ability in the graveyard, and repeat the loop simply through Necrotic Ooze alone. This is why the Ooze line is one of the best lines to go for, because you actually just simply put your combo directly into the yard and you can go for it. A couple pieces that are really good to have when it comes to the Asmodeus engine. Things like Sheoldred, right? If you could put Sheoldred down early in the game, now every time you're drawing cards through Asmodeus and through Necrotic Ooze, you're gaining 14 life every time you draw those 7 cards. Another piece that we really used to use, not so much seen anymore, but is still in decks, is Vilis, Broker of Blood. You pay a black and 2 life, and a target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards. When we used to play with Vilis mainly in Sheoldred before the printing of Hoarding Broodlord, these were kind of your main engines, because with Vilis, you not only could wipe the board of creatures, but every time you activated his ability, you drew 4 cards through Vilis, you paid the black through Kirik's ability, you would draw 4 cards, you would gain 8 life, and then you would start nuking creatures on the board. But the fun part about it is, say this is early in the game, right? You've been able to reanimate stuff. This is a turbo deck, so you're going to have stuff out. Nobody else does, right? So what you do there is you actually just simply stack triggers on Vilis and Sheoldred. And then once you've drawn a ton of cards and gained a bunch of life, and maybe they're a little bit low, you can actually activate the ability over top of the ability actually happening before it finally dies and essentially draw your entire deck. A couple more lines that actually win the game, that I personally do not run in my builds are your Bolas' Citadels, Aetherflux, and Sensei's Divining Top. Crick helps with that. Obviously, Bolas' Citadel will only cost 3 mana rather than the 6 it typically is, but a lot of people have shied away from that after the printing of Sheoldred. Life gain wasn't something we were super concerned about. But I do want to show an interesting line that you can take if you have the life to do it. This is a pretty life-intensive line, but essentially what we're going to do is we are going to take our opponent's win con. What this starts with is a Blood Celebrant, a Praetor's Grasp, and Lion's Eye Diamond. Blood Celebrant, you pay a black and 1 life, and you add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So essentially 3 life, make a mana of any color, right? Praetor's Grasp, you search a target opponent's library for a card, you exile it face down, and then you can cast it. But it does not color fix, which is where Blood Celebrant comes in. And then everyone knows Lion's Eye Diamond. It sacrifices, you discard your hand, and add 3 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool. How does this work? What are we doing here? Say you have these pieces. You have this on board. Praetor's Grasp is in your hand. We use some mana on board. You maybe use Crick. Like I said, this is a pretty life-intensive line, so you have to be careful how you go about it. There's also some ways to help offset it just a little bit, but we'll talk about it. So whether it's through life or mana, you're going to cast Praetor's Grasp, and you're going to target one of your opponents that's typically in Grixis, your blue farm player, your Rog side player, and you're going to Praetor's Grasp them. You, at that point, are going to steal their Underworld Breach. Once their Underworld Breach is in exile, you can either A, sack the Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 red in order to cast it, or you can pay 3 life through Blood Celebrant's ability to give yourself the red, use one of your other mana, and cast the Underworld Breach. You'll sack the Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 black. You will exile 3 cards from your library, and you will cast the Praetor's Grasp and target that same opponent again. So after that point, you will take their Brain Freeze. You will exile 3, bring back the Lion's Eye Diamond. You'll sack their Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 blue. You will cast their Brain Freeze, and you will target yourself. You will essentially go through the Brain Freeze line in mono black. Once you've milled out the table, there's a couple different ways. Either A, you do mill everyone and you simply pass turn, or you finish it up by casting the Praetor's Grasp 1 more time and take their Thassa's Oracle. From there, you simply bring back the Lion's Eye Diamond through their Underworld Breach, sack it for 3 blue, and cast their own Thassa's Oracle to win the game. One other thing that I wanted to talk about is online, if you look at some lists, you will see that some people do not go for the Chainer Dementia Master loop, but they still run Grey Merchant. However, people have been going for Razaketh style lines, but Razaketh is a creature that sacrifices another creature to tutor up a card. So essentially what it goes for is essentially Manual Storm with Grey Merchant of Asphodel. It will sacrifice another creature on the board, typically not Keurig. You will tutor up your Grey Merchant. You'll put your Grey Merchant either into the yard or onto the battlefield, gain your life, sack it to tutor up another Entomb, Animate Dead, something like that. Then you'll bring back the Grey Merchant of Asphodel again. And Razaketh as a card is very good. I do like Razaketh. Not in my personal build. I don't really like Razaketh all that much, but it is a line that you can go for. And it is something that I figured I should at least bring up to let people know. So the main reason that I personally do not like the Razaketh lines is Crick is so powerful in order to enable some of these creature-based combos. And a lot of the ones that I personally like, which is another reason why I personally don't run the Bolas' Citadel line anymore, is I don't want to feed Rhystic Studies. I do not want to feed Mystic Remoras. I do not want to feed a lot of these pieces that you'll typically see in a game of CEDH, regardless of if it's turn 2 or turn 3, you'll probably see these pieces. So the Manual Storm stuff is good. I just don't like feeding those things, and I would much rather activate abilities and never give you a chance to respond to me, rather than give you the chance to blow me out with a force of will. For me personally, That's why I don't go for those lines. That does it for Crick. Crick is a very powerful, very, very powerful engine. It can go very, very fast. Obviously, as you can tell, it's also very hard to interact with depending on the wins that you go for. And it's also very low mana cost as far as some of the wins that you can go for. Something like an Entomb and Reanimate just wins you the game, and all it took you was essentially 4 generic to win the game with him. Very powerful card, very fun deck. Once you understand the lines, it is an absolute blast to play. And so that's why I figured I would come on here and show off some of the lines. One of our Crick decks videos that had Crick in it did very well, and I feel like maybe some people were interested in just Crick himself, and so I just wanted to show off some of the lines here today to give you an idea of what Crick is capable of and how it can actually win the game, how fun it is, and how strong it is. So hopefully that helps. If there's any other lines that people go for, I guess one last shout out line would be some people do still go for Professor Onyx and Chain of Smog. Again, I'm not big on casting a lot of spells, so that's just me personally. If there's any other lines that people know that want to be talked about or want to be shown on a video, I'd be more than happy to do it in a short. But these are the main lines that I've seen and I personally play in my personal Keurig deck. Yeah, that's going to be it for Keurig, son of Yawgmouth. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You have a good one.